basically, I don't want to say it's a funeral, but basically mourning the loss of Roki Sasaki, because Roki Sasaki will not be signing with the New York Mets, as we did get a report that came out from John Heyman and also Andy Martino. Everybody pretty much confirmed it, that the Mets were out of the sweepstakes for Roki Sasaki, and it looks like we're down to a final top three, that being the Dodgers, the Padres, and the Blue Jays, which was confirmed by Jeff Passan about, I don't know, like an hour ago. But I do think that we all knew that in some way it was a pipe dream, but the Mets end up falling a little short in this race, even though we knew that there wasn't really much of a strong connection as some of the West Coast teams. It looks like the Mets rotation right now, whether there is question marks about it, the aftermath of Sasaki. Frank, we talked a little bit about this last week, the rotation and things like that. Personally, I'm just not really that shocked. I think that there was a little bit of a possibility, but it wasn't as big as some of the West Coast teams that we knew that have been involved for quite a while, probably even before the Mets were even mentioned.
Listen, we kind of talked about it as it was best case scenario if somehow they could land him, but we weren't projecting it nor expecting it. So, if he does go to a Dodger or a Padres, okay, I mean, this is not the first or second time or third time that this has happened, so it wouldn't really shock us. At least the Mets got a meeting. I mean, not every team did, so that's something to be encouraged by, but you don't get any points for being close. So it stinks that we didn't get him, but again, they're being opportunistic. So because they didn't get Roki, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden Jack Flaherty's going to end up over here or some other free agent starting pitcher. They're going to make some calls on the trade market. If that doesn't materialize, they're going to go into what they have. I mean, we've talked about this plenty of times, but the Mets may circle a guy that they really want, but if they don't get him, that doesn't mean that they're just going to automatically get somebody else. I mean, they're still going to look for their guys that fit the value that they believe should be offered.
And that's a point of panic, I think, that a lot of Mets fans go after, where it's like, okay, you have to have this direct pivot because we have a massive hole on this team, and you need to just go to the next big thing and just full on, spend money in that area where that area went that you originally wanted. And I feel like that's not really the way that David Stearns likes to operate. He kind of likes to be in the more opportunistic market of seeing some pieces as an actual bonus or something like that. Personally, when I look at Roki Sasaki, I think that the better situation overall, even though checking some of the boxes maybe seems like the Mets, I think that it's a little bit more based on the track record, or the recent track record of some of these teams developing pitching, because the Mets recently, maybe it's getting better, but I don't think that it has been full on tested yet as to where this is actually a continuation of how things are going to continue to be. We know that they did very good work with Severino and Minaya. We saw some relievers come through and break out. Reed Garrett had a really solid campaign. We saw Danel Nunez come out of nowhere. We've seen some of these pieces come up here and do well and give us quality of some things that maybe we weren't expecting, as for when they just did not have the best track record or they were kind of on the downswing. I think that a little bit needs to happen a little bit more down the line of the Mets kind of taking some of these diamonds in the rough for them to be considered as one of the top tier locations to go for. And when it comes to the overall thought of maybe this rotation isn't enough, maybe this rotation isn't good enough, I will always continue to be anticipating that it's going to be better than face value because of what they've been able to do, or what Stearns has been able to do with a lot of pitchers that seem like the no names, the no name brand, or maybe the second tier types of guys, and they're able to maximize it to another type of level. On paper, it doesn't look great. I understand that. There's a possibility that it goes south, but this is the point of emphasis in pitching. This is the reason why you brought David Stearns in, to emphasize these types of things. And I agree with this starting pitching market, especially with the rapid increase of injuries with pitchers, with the risk, or maybe it's just the history of the Mets risk. I just don't think it makes sense to go all in on all these top line guys just because you have a massive need, you have a massive this, a massive that. And you can always give me the fact that the Dodgers, they always do this. We want to be the Dodgers. We want to be the East Coast Dodgers. The Dodgers have the resources to do so. The Dodgers have the history of talent being there and talent blossoming. They have a history of, relievers doing very well there. They have a history of trading good assets because they have a good farm system away. And I had this argument with Andrew, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, about the rotation and all of these guys out there. It's not really the fact that we're not trading for a starter and we're not trading these pieces away. Stearns is not looking at the trade market. He is. It's just more of the fact that, and this is a little bit of a reality check here, and I know some people might not agree, that there's not really many teams that want our prospects because we don't have many great ones. We don't have many tier one types of guys that could be franchise cornerstones for a team if they end up panning out. We have some marginal players. We have some guys with maybe some high upside that maybe could be helium prospects in the future. But right now, if I look at this Mets farm system of legitimate prospects that could possibly be major league caliber players from day one, I'm looking at Brandon Sproat. That's it. That's pretty much it. Like, maybe there is some promise there, but there is not really much of a guarantee as compared to somebody like Brandon Sproat. And we all know they're not trading him. Listen, we all know that I am not one to blow smoke up the team's ass. I never will. If I see something I don't like, I'm going to point it out. But I do like the upside of the Mets rotation that they built. Maybe that sounds like a little bit of a hot take, but I do think that this is going to provide a little bit more than people believe it will. Is there unknown? Sure. But I'm starting to kind of connect the dots as to where if this rotation's here until the deadline, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that if you want to go all in there, because I do think that this type of rotation can keep you in that sort of contention.
The thing is, it could go either way. I mean, there is a scenario where, okay, these guys, it does work out and they have a solid rotation. But there is another scenario where, some of these guys, it doesn't work out. And I think for me, we've talked about, like, I'm not necessarily saying, like, get Ace. Like, if we got Ace, I mean, I'd be thrilled. Yeah. Like, listen, since it's not my money, if you got Corbin Burns or you got Blake Snell or, someone like that, I mean, great. I mean, that's wonderful, especially considering that the Dodgers were the ones that end up getting Blake Snell. And you're going to be competing with the Diamondbacks, and they got Corbin Burns already having Zach Gallen and some others. So, I mean, that's not ideal that those guys they're staying in the National League. But I think overall what I am more looking at was somebody in the middle of the rotation that I know not only makes 30 starts, but gives me 30 quality starts year in, year out. In my opinion, looking at the current Mets rotation, they don't have that. The New York Mets do not have a guy in this rotation who for only 2 straight seasons has been healthy and really good. None of these guys fit that mold. So, I mean, that's the one thing that concerns me, is that I feel like for pretty much for any of these guys, it could go either way. And I understand, like, if you have some of those, like if you have a Clay Holmes and a Manaea, but if it's like we're talking about now also a Montas and also a Senga coming off an injury and not pitching too well when he was on the field, besides the one start against Atlanta, like, that's concerning when you have that many of these question marks. I feel like if there's just one guy who's a little more stable, right in the middle, whether he's a 2 or even a 3, I would feel a little better of like, okay, well, at least we can count on this guy. But other than that, I'm like, okay, maybe Senga's really good, or maybe Manaea does it again, but this is just the second half, new pitching slot. I mean, we've talked about it countless times. And it's like, oh, well, maybe Sproat gets called up and he's phenomenal. But it's like, that's so many ifs. I just feel like there are not many, if any, guarantees in that rotation. And that's kind of where my concern is, and where I lean more to the side of, like, there's a better chance that it probably is not a great rotation. Maybe it's okay. I don't think it's great. And I think that also the thing that bothers me personally is the expectation. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to, is that when you're coming off of an NLCS appearance against the Dodgers and you add Juan Soto, there's pretty high expectations. Like, you are expected to go very deep into the playoffs. And when I look at this rotation, at least on paper, it doesn't scream deep in the playoffs to me. That's just the way I personally feel about it.
This is the thing about me, is when I look at how these types of things are built, I'm not one to really latch on to the thought of this is the offseason to win. Right. We know that this is going to be a 162 game season. Things are going to happen. And is there going to be some thought of a way where you need a lot of arms? And to that concern, where you're talking about is like, oh, we don't have this guy where he can't give us 30 starts, give us 30 quality starts, a good campaign. I think we had probably the most healthy starting rotation the Mets have had last season when it came to Manaea and Quintana and Severino, because all of them were healthy throughout the entire year. We don't know if that's going to be a guarantee. Obviously, we haven't seen that full-on consistency from not just the Mets franchise, but the Mets pitching staff. I mean, even when they had those young players, I mean, let's not forget.
Well,
I mean, it was a shitstorm. I mean, those guys, it was like a one healthy run through the rotation of DeGrom, Syndergaard, Wheeler.
Yeah, like 5 days. Yeah, that's it.
Five straight days where they pitched.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there was never a season
nuts.
though where you had all those
Crazy.
guys do it. But even this past season, I mean, you didn't have your ace and Senga pretty much the entire year. So, like, even though you're saying, oh, this team was healthy last year, it wasn't, because you didn't have Senga. And, you know, as much as people criticize him,
I think what I'm trying to say here,
too.
I think what I'm trying to say here, let me just say, is they got the innings. They got the innings that we were kind of concerned of getting.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say here, because usually they don't get, you know, that 150 plus innings from like 3 different starters, and they got that completely outright and even more from guys like Manaea, Severino, and Quintana. Obviously, Quintana's not going to be coming back. Severino went off to the A's. Manaea is back, who I think could be somewhat of a little bit of everything that could be maybe a workhorse. You know, there are some concerns there. I do think that there is something to say as to where maybe the Mets do emphasize a little bit more of a 6-man rotation. We've talked about this before, where these guys can be a little bit more fresh. You turn 30 starts needed into maybe 26 starts needed, and you can get a little bit less of the reps, and you can kind of create that quality with the quantity. Guys can be more rested. They can be a little bit more sharp. And I think from the outside looking in, it looks like, oh, just a bunch of bodies, just a bunch of guys, because Griffin Canning, one of the worst starting pitchers all year last year. Clay Holmes was a reliever. He was a starter with Pittsburgh in 2017, 2018. I mean, for a long time. And then you bring back Sean Manaea, who kind of ran out of gas at the end, which I think could benefit from the rotation. I think that there are pieces that can come together. It's just the fact that you don't see the names, you don't see those established names, you don't see those guys who have made a name for themselves that can continue to give you a little bit more of an advantage, be a legitimate rotation at the top. And I think that that's the best way to look at it with those resources that the Mets have. Now, for those of you, I know that people are talking about, you know, Stearns being cheap or whatever. I'm sure. Okay, great. He's cheap, whatever. I'm not going to get into that entire discussion. But when it comes to the entirety of this rotation, and you look at it compared to the Dodgers, they have the resources to build this super rotation of guys. And when it comes to the Dodgers and maybe a way that can maybe turn off somebody like Roki Sasaki, we've seen the Dodgers' star power. We have seen all of their guys in that rotation. Even though they traded for him, we've seen a lot of injuries. Let's not forget, the Dodgers beat us last year with a bullpen game. I'm pretty sure we beat them in both of those bullpen games, but they still were able to win the World Series. So
I think they won one and lost one.
They may have.
I think Game 6
possible.
was bullpen Manaea versus bullpen, and they
Bueller maybe
Landon,
no
Knack,
Flaherty. They beat Flaherty.
Yes, they beat Flaherty. They lost to Flaherty and beat Flaherty as well. There was like a 1-1.
Okay. So, and then Manaea beat the Dodgers and lost to the Dodgers. Okay. So it's more of the name brand frustration as compared to what everyone looks at as like, oh, well, you got to get Corbin Burns because we need pitching, top pitching, get that pitcher. I'm okay with not giving 6 years to Corbin Burns. I'm okay with that type of thing. But when it comes to Corbin Burns, there are still concerns. I think that every single pitcher on the market, every single pitcher that's not available, every single pitcher that is available, there will always be a concern, whether it is health, whether it is the overall consistency, whether it is control, command. He gives up too many homers. He does this or that. There's always going to be a point with pitchers as to where they become a very disposable position. And that is how I think David Stearns views it. And I understand why he does not want to touch it in that sense. Do I think that they can be well aggressive, maybe years and years to come? Sure. But there is a philosophy to have in here where, yes, the Dodgers get everyone. They get all these big I get it. But they have the resources to do that. And I think that a lot of Mets fans look at it and they're like, well, we have all the money, more money than God. We have these prospects that are in the top 100. You don't know how every single organization views those prospects. You don't know how everyone views the Mets organization outside of the money. Because again, from what we have heard from Roki Sasaki in regards to the Mets, the biggest blinking red factor with the Mets organization was Jeremy Hefner. He's very impressed with Jeremy Hefner. We never know if that was true or not because it came from Jim Bowden, who's not the most reliable source. Again, no disrespect to him. And, you know, sometimes he can elaborate on things. You kind of sink back into reality here. And I said this, I think it was like 2 weeks ago or something, from the body of work that Jeremy Hefner has done. And maybe there is a more of a view inside the industry. But when it comes to the look of what Jeremy Hefner has done, I don't think a typical 23-year-old is looking at the mild success that Jeremy Hefner has had in quite a long tenure with the Mets and licking his chops saying, I want to go there. And again, maybe I'm thinking about this all wrong. Maybe Jeremy Hefner is a lot more of a genius than we put out there. Maybe it'll continue to get better, which is what I want. But right now, the Mets are just not in that stage where they can't sell anything to these free agents or anything to all these other organizations besides money, besides their desperate measure to trade these prospects away for them. And listen, none of these prospects I'm really big on, and maybe there are some organizations that are not, and that's the main reason as to why they're not acquiring the talent that you're seeing the Red Sox acquire in Garrett Crochet, buy low candidate in Jesus Luzardo. In the future market, don't be surprised if they don't end up with Dylan Cease. Maybe in the future market, don't be surprised if they don't get Luis Castillo, because there's probably a look at it as to where the Mets prospects just aren't that great. And if you want to look at it from face value, I'm just saying there are a lot of pieces of information, especially from the position players, because I know the pitching has progressed recently. A lot of the hitting tools, a lot of the overall tools of these players in the top of the farm system that are considered the very best of the Mets minor league system. It's not really great. It really isn't great. I'm not going to lie. Maybe it changes. Maybe it doesn't. But as of right now, the current position that the Mets are in, they have to build this thing up to continue to build this thing up to the Dodgers level, or maybe even the Padres level, or maybe even some of these other places that develop pitching well. I saw it as, you know, checking things off of a list, and I still see the Dodgers or Padres as the better organization to go to if you are a young phenom upside pitcher such as Roki Sasaki. It was possible, but not as possible as I think people saw it from how this organization has been viewed. Maybe it's just because they just haven't done it for that long, or they're not in that position to do so.